Thank you all for joining today. It is my pleasure to introduce Weila Gong, who is our guest speaker today. She's going to speak about her new book, Implementing a Low Carbon Future, Climate Leadership in Chinese Cities. And Dr. Gong has both lived and researched in China and in Europe and in the United States. So she has a far more international expertise than is typical of academic researchers. And so it is a real pleasure to welcome her back to Brown University. She's been here before, but I will leave the floor to you. And we imagine probably having 30 to 40 minutes of comments and then just some time at the end for question and answer as well. And so students especially, think of your questions as she's speaking so that we can get the most out of her expertise. Thanks so much. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kogan. So can you hear me? Is everything? Yeah, clearly. Okay. Yeah, it's my great pleasure to be here at the Climate Solution Lab. So to present my first book titled Implementing a Low Carbon Future, Climate Leadership in Chinese Cities. So this book is based on an original study that I conducted in 4 Chinese cities, drawing on over 100 interviews and process tracing of nearly 1 decade of implementation process across the cities. So this book tries to answer the question that why are some cities more successful than others in initiating and implementing low carbon policy actions in a centralized political system like China's. So there is a big debate about how can we measure the success of climate action and avoid the climate ambition trap where governments pledged bold political climate targets but do not able to deliver the actions on the ground. So after U.S. federal level government retreat from climate action internationally, there is a growing interest from the international community watching whether China is able to fill in the role and take up more of a climate initiative to fill in the void in climate leadership. So this chart shows you the carbon emissions globally from 1750 to 2024. So we can see for a very long time, so the emission levels did not change much until the period of 1950s to 1970s. So firstly, initially drawn by developed economies such as U.S. and European countries, and more recently drawn by developing economies such as China and other Asian countries. So that means the developing countries will have stronger influence in the future growth of carbon emissions. Like China is the world's largest developing economy. So how China can deal with is decarbonization will also generate much lessons for the rest of the developing economies in the world. So across the globe, we know that over 100 countries pledged their climate targets, and also the goal to achieve carbon neutrality around mid-century. But we know that no national climate actions can be or the climate goals can be achieved without subnational engagement. Indeed, across the world, there are over 3,000 cities and local regions have pledged climate targets. But we know very little about how they translate those targets into action. In fact, recent research shows that only less than 10% of those local areas and the regions are on track of achieving some of their targets. So how can we understand the uneven local implementation on the ground? as the world's largest carbon emitter, China have pledged its climate goals. So China aims to meet its carbon peak before 2030. Then it aims to continue to reduce 7 to 10% of its greenhouse gas emission below the peak levels before 2035, with the ultimate goal to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060. So China, as a big country, is also have a lot of regional diversity. So the extent to whether China can achieve its decarbonization definitely have a huge impact on the global direction of addressing climate change. But China's success is also in large depend on local efforts. So this map shows you some of the hotspots in China that produce a lot of can I move or no? Yeah. So some of the hotspots in China, so there are the major metropolitan areas that have huge population and consume a lot of energy. So in total, the China cities account for over 85% of China's carbon emissions. So that means whether China can achieve its climate goals also in large depend on whether those cities can become truly low carbon. So we know that China is a centralized political system, but it also has an element of multi-level governance. Policy experimentation is a very unique policy implementation process and also very unique policy-making mechanism in China, where national government delegate a lot of freedom to local government to propose feasible policy solutions before them scale up to facilitate more of a larger level of policy change at the national level. So the climate program is called the National Low Carbon City Pilot Program that I examined in this book. Is a centerpiece that the national government engage the subnational government in its low carbon policy implementation. So the National Low Carbon City Pilot Programs marks the starting point of the subnational government trying to experiment new ideas and solutions for exploring low carbon development. So starting in the year of 2010. Then the National Development and Reform Commission introduced this pilot program to encourage subnational engagement in exploring low carbon development. So in developing country, protect the climate is not just about protect the environment. It's about how to facilitate development. What type of development? So the kind of low carbon development is really trying to decouple local economic growth from increased use of fossil fuels. So as you can see on the map on the left, almost every province has one or two pilots as of the year 2018. So in total, from 2010 to 2018, there were 81 cities joined the national pilot program with specific policy targets and measures to reduce carbon emissions across energy, building, and the transportation sectors. However, as you can see that only very few of them were able to introduce institutional measures. That is very important for long-term change because we know that institutions such as standards, regulation, and legislation are important to shape the individual and organizational behavior for a longer term. So how can we understand the local uneven implementation in low carbon policy action? So here are the two cities that I include in my study. So there are two of the four cases. So these are the two cities. They joined the national pilot program around the same time, but over years have totally different approach to deliver their policy outcomes. So Shenzhen and Xiamen, so they are both known as environmentally friendly city at a similar level of economic development in terms of GDP per capita. Joined the pilot program the same year, but with with totally different policy outcome. So Shenzhen used to be a fishing village next to Hong Kong, then has become a leader in low carbon action. This local areas, the local government has fostered a globally competitive electronic vehicle industry, and also launched the first local carbon emission trading system in China. But not every city like Shenzhen, including Xiamen. Xiamen is located opposite to Taiwan. It's known for its environmental friendly image. It is a tourist city. It joined the pilot program the same year as Shenzhen did, with a very ambitious low carbon urban renewal program. But that program was not able to implement it. So usually, we assume that two cities with strong political support, when they join the national pilot program, would have similar progress as a result. But we only see one city more successful in delivering the outcome than the others. So how can we understand the variation in local policy implementation? So what the literature tells us about the local responses towards climate policy making or climate action is all about interest groups' influence, central-local relations, and political leadership. So we know that in democratic systems, such as in the US, interest groups' influence in climate policy making, particularly at the local level, is very strong. But in the case of China, when those cities joined the national pilot program, there was not influenced by the interest group, such as any industrial sector, but led by the local government. So the interest group explanation cannot answer our question. Then second, for China expert, they've played so much emphasis on central-local relations. Basically, the consumption is that local government is very responsive towards central government political appeal because central government have devised a evaluation system for local government and officials to make them responsive to national requests. However, those cities joined the national pilot program at a time there was no evaluation system introduced by the central government, even without any systematic or institutional funding. So how those cities joined the national program with uncertain political or economic gains? Third, political leaderships. We know that in both democratic and more of a centralized political system, political leaders such as mayors and governors, they are very important in setting the agenda. So we usually assume that when a city has a strong leader, we will see more action. But we also know that they change their office from time to time. They won't live in a locality for their entire career. When political leadership, like the political turnover, happens, they're usually the time we see like policy disruption, the lacking of progress. So this research really helps us to fill an important research gap to understand how and why climate policy is more durable in some local areas than others, by emphasize the important role of local bureaucratic entrepreneurs in mobilizing the resources required to translate those climate targets into sustained implementation. So this is my answer. Bridge leadership matters. So I define bridge leadership as the process upon which bridge leaders mobilize the political support and the implementation alliance to translate those political pledges into sustained actions. Who can be the bridge leaders? In the democratic system, we assume that anyone can be policy entrepreneurs, as John Kingdon mentioned that, as long as you invest your time and energy, move the issue on the agenda, provide solutions to the policy challenge. But in the Chinese political system, my research shows that they are the middle-level bureaucrats. They spend almost their entire career in one locality. That enables them to gain the insights into the politics, policy, and the policy-making process. So that years of experience, they know how to mobilize the political support by convince their political leaders, such as mayors, how they can gain from acting on climate action or low carbon development. They are also the actors knows how to build coalition with strong and also important local actors, such as legislators, business actors, to build the coalition to overcome the potential opposition in the implementation process. We know that for any political systems, introducing a new issue areas in the existing political system is huge challenging. And I identified 3 strategies that the bureaucratic entrepreneurs, those bridge leaders, often use to translate those political pledges into action. So first, we need political support. We know that political empathy is usually the key challenges when the new issue areas trying to gain attention and support in the bureaucratic system. So the bridge leaders, they know, as I just mentioned, that how to convince the political leaders the benefits of acting on low carbon issues. Then through that political support, they can generate more of an internal cross-divisional support from different agencies to work on the low carbon issue. Second, create a group of trained personnel. So from John Kington's work, we assume that a policy entrepreneur is like a hero, provide the solution for the policy challenges. But we know that policy entrepreneurs like us only have 24 hours. So my research shows that those bureaucratic entrepreneurs actually rely on a group of trained personnel. They are qualified to provide solutions to the challenges, and they are qualified to design policy and enforce policy in the process. So through that process, the bridge leaders can get the kind of policy solutions and also improve the frame and also keep gaining the support from the shared and also the related stakeholders. Finally, the bridge leaders also knows how to build implementation alliance with the key actors to overcome the potential opposition in the implementation process. So through these 3 strategies, the bridge leaders was able to mobilize the resources and translated those political ideas, pledges into sustained actions leading to implementation outcomes. So one of the key challenges, as we just mentioned, is how to measure the success of climate action. So my approach is measure the success of climate action, particularly the low carbon policy experimentation, in terms of the levels of policy institutionalization. Because in the Chinese system, the carbon data is not that available. Particularly when I did the field research back to China, almost all the data, carbon data is below the city level. They were self-reported. And only just a few cities actually was able to build a carbon accounting system, have continued data. So I used the level of policy institutionalization to measure their governing structure improvement and also their capacity to deal with the implementation challenges. So I measure the level of policy institutionalization in terms of standards, regulation, and legislation. Of particular importance, I find in my research is we need to create a group of trained personnel to enforce those policies. Otherwise, those standard regulations and the legislation will just appear on paper without any action on the ground. So we need these 2 elements to measure the success of policy outcomes. Okay, here I want to show you some how I designed this research. I designed this research into a comparative case studies. I just mentioned the 2 of the cases. So actually all these 4 cases is designed as similar cases in terms of a lot of variables you can think of, like their central local relations, their political support, as well as the kind of industrial influence. However, they have delivered different outcomes over the years. Then I just want to briefly mention the 2 cases. They are not Xiamen and Shenzhen. So the 3rd case is Zhenjiang. Zhenjiang is a city, it's the hub to use coal to produce electricity for the Eastern China. But this city actually introduced a lot of institutional measures, like creating an agency with full-time staff for supervising the low carbon implementation. This city was not able to fully implement its pledge because it has a very strong local power sector beyond their local municipal level governance authority to negotiate. So wasn't able really to build the coalitions in the implementation. Then the fourth case is Nanchang. Nanchang is an inland city. It's a economically lagging city, but it was also able to create some of the first legislations on low carbon development with regulatory government budget for supporting initiative. But this city was considered as a performative engagement case in my study because the bureaucratic entrepreneur promoted the program was mainly with the focus to impress external funders to get the money without really thinking carefully how to implement those policy for a longer term. So we know that Chinese political system is particularly its decision-making process is lacking of transparency. So it's like a black box. So it's only known to the insiders. But I was able to overcome the challenges by conduct over 100 interviews with policy practitioners inside and outside government, including those officials across different levels of government. So I asked them, why you didn't join the national program? And who is the actors really promote this program, and what the other difficulties you encountered in the process, and how and what are the next steps. So I went to the field multiple times, so I was able to collect the original data, like original government documents, and to understand how those leaders exposed to low carbon ideas in their trainings went to the site to talk with business actors through the whole process to reconstruct the local decision-making processes in these 4 cities. So here is the typology of different types of local implementation. So depending on the ability of local bureaucratic entrepreneurs' ability to mobilize political support and the implementation alliance, cities involved in different types of engagement, from substantive engagement. So that is how cities can deliver their climate pledges with actions on the ground when they can secure high political support and implementation alliance, to performative engagement, to symbolic engagement, to sporadic engagement. So that in that case, the local government was not able to deliver the policy goals because the policy entrepreneurs was not able to secure strong political support or implementation alliance. So they usually just involved in random initiatives just one time without much institutional construction. So because of the time limit, today I will just focus on 2 of the cases, but I'm happy to take any questions in the Q&A if you're interested in another 2 types. So the first case is Shenzhen. So Shenzhen is the advanced case in this research. So Shenzhen is a city, so it joined the national pilot program as some of the most lagging cases. But over the years, it has been able to create a level of policy institutionalization consisting of regulation, standard, and legislation. It launched the first low carbon emission trading system in China. And the low carbon emission trading system is one of the major initiatives that Shenzhen created. So here I want to explain to you a bit about the process. So how Shenzhen can become the first city launch the pilot Shenzhen emission trading system. So for emission trading system, we know that it's a policy mechanism that the government tried to encourage industrial participation and also the high carbon emitters to reduce their emissions through like credit trading. Then US used to be one of the leaders in introducing carbon emission trading system. Now China has the world's largest carbon emission trading system based on local experimentation, including the case like Shenzhen. So how Shenzhen become the leader? So it all comes down to the vice mayor. So the vice mayor Tang, so when he heard the news, there will be a pilot program issued by the national government, he convinced the mayor. Then also they went together to Beijing and convinced the National Development and Reform Commission to put Shenzhen on the list. So Shenzhen became a national pilot for carbon emission trading system. Then after that, he convinced a group of professionals, including both, I think, researchers and also non-researchers, when they went to EU to study in the EU emission trading system. And when they came back, they was able to design the Shenzhen emission trading system. Of particular importance is that the vice mayor Tang was able to work with the local People's Congress to push a legislation that requires over 700 of local enterprises to join the emission trading system compulsorily. Because previously, when they just doing the test round of a conversation with the industrial sector, some of those sectors, they are feeling really skeptical about the emission trading system. They thought that might be a new form of government rent-seeking behaviors. So through the legislation, so that gave the government the authority to require enterprises participation. And since then, Shenzhen emission trading system have been functioning as a major institution with trained personnel to enforce low carbon policies over the years. So this shows you the timeline, how the vice mayor was able to convince the mayor, so also the national government, to put Shenzhen on the list. Then the studying tools happened within 2 years. Then they came up with the solutions for designing the system. Then with the legislation, actually, that made the Shenzhen emission trading system both as an institution, but also paired with trained personnel and enforcement. So even after the bridge leader left the office, a new mayor took the office, this mechanism keep functioning despite the leadership changes. So here I want to show you some quotes from my research showing the importance of the bridge leader. So the first quote, I talked with some of the local officials who work very closely with Vice Mayor Tang about the carbon emission trading system process. So he mentioned that Vice Mayor Tang conveyed the urgency of the ETS pilot to Shenzhen Municipal People's Congress. He mobilized his contacts and networks from his time as the vice director of the committee of the People's Congress. So that means we tend to believe that local officials, if they cannot get a better chance to promote it to the higher level, like vice mayor, they are not the political leaders because they usually stay their entire career locally, won't be so motivated to do anything creative. But you can see that they are very important. They are resourceful, powerful to build a coalition, to make change happening. Then the second quote, I also talked to the person after a few years later when the bridge leader left the office. I want to see whether the institution is still functioning in a way as we would expect it to be. So he mentioned that our work has not changed much since Vice Mayor Tang left the office. At Shenzhen ETS, we have 40 to 50 employees, and we are regularly in touch with Shenzhen Development and Reform Commission as we operate the system. So you see that even in the city, so it has the capacity to introduce the institution to overcome the challenges in the political leadership's turnovers, in fact, on the policy cycle. So that is what we learned from Shenzhen. Another case is Xiamen. Xiamen is a city, as I just mentioned, very environmental friendly city, as a tourist city. So it joined the pilot the same year as Shenzhen did, with a very ambitious low carbon urban renewal program. But it didn't able to implement it. How? It all comes down to the loss of Deputy Director Lin, who acted as the bridge leader, the bureaucratic entrepreneur at the beginning, but was not able to support the whole systems led to the building of institution and also the creation of the labor to enforce the implementation. So Lin was able to convince the mayor the importance of being a pilot. And also actually create a group of researchers within its bureaucratic agency, that is the construction agency in Xiamen, responsible for building and housing. Then the materials actually made the Xiamen became one of the first pilot in China. But after that, the overseeing the implementation of low carbon city pilot, the authority was transferred from the Lin's office to another agency called the Development and Reform Agency in Xiamen. That is an agency very powerful, have all the coordinating macroeconomic activity management function, but that agency didn't have anyone, officials, interested in low carbon. So after the power shifting happened, for a very long time, Xiamen was not able to introduce any institutional efforts into low carbon policy implementation. So when a new mayor came into the office, it just jumped to another topic. So this shows you the timeline of the policy change that happens in Xiamen. So at the beginning, the Deputy Director Lin was able to make the efforts and also provide the solutions with his team to make Xiamen as one of the pilot in China. Then the administrative authority shifts to another agency with no people interested in low carbon. Then when a new mayor took the office, the low carbon issue was basically shelved in the government, except some random initiative happening after a few years later. So here also some interview quotes I want to share with you. So the first one is I talked with a local national official in charge of the low carbon city pilot program in Beijing. So she mentioned that Xiamen was very active at the beginning, but I don't know who is in charge of the low carbon pilot program as they change the contact person too often. So you see, they didn't mention top political leaders, mayors. They mentioned the contact person, the local officials' role in coordinating the implementation process, and show that as a sign of the low carbon issue may not appear very high on their everyday work. So then I also talked to a professor who won a grant from Xiamen government on low carbon development. So his comments was that low carbon is a thing of the past already. Now Xiamen is all for the beautiful Xiamen strategy. So we can see that even for those that are really supportive of low carbon development, sometimes feel helpless when a city government decided to move on to another agenda just so fast when the political turnover happens when the bureaucratic capacity support was not there. So then I also talked with a person who works very closely with the government side on the low carbon city pilot program implementation. So he mentioned that the challenge with Xiamen's low carbon issue is that there is no other agent we can work with, unlike that in Shenzhen, to improve the implementation. So that means that even in a centralized political system, there's a lot of local variation. So local governments still need to build a local coalition in the implementation process to be successful to deliver their climate goals. Okay, let us wrap up. So my research, this book really helps us to understand important question. How can we explain uneven local implementation in low carbon policy in a centralized political system like China's? It also answered the question about how can we understand why some areas have more of a durable low carbon policy implementation than others. So my book emphasized the important role of bureaucratic entrepreneurs as bridge leaders in the implementation process, particularly by mobilizing the resources required to translate those political pledges into sustained actions on the ground. They usually use three strategies. First is winning the political support to overcome the political apathy in the bureaucratic system. Second, gathering trained personnel to provide policy solutions to policy challenges. Third, build of alliance to overcome the potential oppositions in the implementation process. Of very important importance, I want to also emphasize the importance of the creation of trained personnel that need to be designed to pair with the creation of institutionalization, like those standards, regulation, and legislation in the implementation process. So looking forward, so we know that climate change as an issue areas has changed a lot over the past 10 years. It was usually be seen as an area of international cooperation. Now it becomes an area with a lot of international competition. So I think my research shows that even in a centralized political system like China's, we can see local officials, they are creative, they are entrepreneurial. They was able to introduce institutions and also create a division of labor to sustain those actions despite the changes in the political leadership. So when we think about like democratic systems, big players, so how can we find the bridge leadership? So who can be the bridge makers? Thank you.
So much, Weila.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask, actually, do we have microphones that we can use? Okay, maybe we can take one and well, the talk is great for so many reasons, but in particular, the notion that China is the biggest polluter in the world from a climate change perspective, and cities are, as you say, 85% of the pollution from China. And so understanding what's going on in these Chinese cities is absolutely crucial. So thank you for helping us think through that and giving us more information about it. I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions in just one sec, but I'm going to use/abuse my privilege as the chair while I'm holding the mic to ask a very technical question, and it really is about your dependent variable, if you will. So your outcome of interest is policy institutionalization, and as it happens, a few of us, including Jenna, are working on a project about thinking about. At the U.S. state level, how do we think about states that are different U.S. states that are more or less successful in institutionalizing climate policy at a state level, and we have struggled mightily to really understand, how to code different states as being more or less successful. And so I was just curious whether you could say a couple words about how you really coded systematically the different cities as being more or less successful, right? So in your opening presentation, you talked about, you have this picture of Shenzhen with the nice, electric vehicle charging stations, and then something else. And I think probably that actually captures something very true, that visually you can see the difference between the different cities. But I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about, as a scholar, how you thought about deciding which cities had strong or weak policy institutionalization. How about you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So yeah, I think we are kind of like really in this, I think in the exploration how to measure the successful outcome. Yeah, I think I choose to use the level of policy institutionalization because I thought a lot about the continuity of climate actions, how to make climate actions durable. So that is one thing. So if we want to think about how to make climate action durable, we need some institutions because that are the ones to secure those like resources, right? Particularly if you have like human agency, like if you have a climate office in a specific city, they are staffed with like 3 or 4 people working daily just to write proposals, think new ideas, reach out to international corporations. You have much better chance than the cities. They just write a pledge. So we want to achieve carbon neutrality at some point. So that is how I focus on the outcome, like the experimentations, what kind of new institutions in terms of regulations, standards, and legislation being created in the process. Particularly, I also emphasize the creation of the trained personnel enforce it. So I think then the second thing is why I use these three like indicators, because so my focus is on China. So I know better about the energy and the resources those local officials need to put into make those standards, regulation, legislation happens. So usually standards is just more of a, like you can promote standards with academic, right? So that is take less time and less contentious, less of a debate. So that is easier, faster. Then the regulations usually it comes with different bureaucratic agency. You have the authority to issue regulations, particularly with some of the stakeholders, like building sector. You have green building code, green building like a regulation as like executive, administrative executive order. That's take a bit longer time, but it still like need a lot of like executive resources to make it happen. The most hard part, even in the centralized political system, we sometimes think the legislation is just a red rubber. It takes a lot of time. Like for the case of Nanchang, even for its the low carbon policy implementation, like the legislation happen, it's need rounds of negotiations with different like stakeholders, like the People's Congress, the Development and Reform Commissions, and also the related actors. They question why we need a legislation, why you just can't have like a pledge. So I think that kind of process. So I'm focused on the process rather than just a immediate outcome. That is the process involves resource mobilization to create those institutions. So I think those cities and the RIOs, if they can create the institutions, particularly with trained personnel, that shows how much effort they have put into. That also lead them in a stronger position to defend the climate interest once they become a leader in the field. As maybe later we can also in our discussion, there are some areas, local officials, it's just in their interest to make this continue to happen. So that is different from the political leaders who change their position 3 or 5 years. So we see a strong importance for those locals. They know how to create and defend the interests of acting on low carbon issues by looking at the institutions.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I am going to hand a microphone over to Jen Haddon for a moment. And then if anyone else has questions, please just raise your hand and I'll keep track. Thanks.
Thanks, Weila. Thanks for your talk. This is such an interesting subject and obviously has very important implications. So I wanted to ask you a little bit more about kind of what policy conclusions we should draw from this. So I think it's very interesting to think about these bridge leaders, and you point out all of these really important things that they do. I wonder if, they're so central to achieving this policy implication. How do we get more bridge leaders, right? Sort of what determines why someone becomes a bridge leader or doesn't take on that role? And then the second thing I was wondering if you could reflect on is how much the concept of bridge leadership is particular to China versus just maybe applicable to other kinds of federal systems too. Because it seems like, in the Chinese system, the central local dynamic is kind of specific in some ways, and the local leaders are evaluated by the central government in a way that they're not in other federal systems. But I'm not sure if that's an important part of the incentives that these bridging leaders have, or whether it's something that is potentially translatable to other contexts. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. Yeah, that is also a very important question as to how to think about the application of the concept, as well as how can we find more bridge leaders. So I think, because the focus is on China, so I can draw of my expertise in China's experience to think about maybe it's more of what are the institutional arrangement can actually very helpful for us to see more of a bridge leaders. I think at least from the institutional setting, there need to be a political environment that encourage local experimentation. So in China, it's very obvious because policy experimentation has been a special policy making process have been used frequently in China over years. So you may heard about the economic opening up, like making Shenzhen, Xiamen, some of the sites can do international trading. That are parts of the experimentation. So then you may also heard about recently China are also trying to create more like carbon peak pilot similar to the low carbon city pilots that are also experimentation. So China actually naturally has this as a policy process just to encourage subnational engagement in the process. But the things like in China also, due to the Beijing's priority, sometimes the local officials have more room to experiment, particularly when the economic is good. So they want to have new ideas how to renovate new urban areas, incorporate new standards, low carbon standards. But right now it's also, when we look at the Chinese policy, more recently when you kind of more emphasize on top-down enforcement, also try to make those local officials more accountable by tracing whether they have some violation in the past. It's reasonable, but sometimes it actually also make those local officials very cautious about anything for experimentation, because I also have projects on coal transition. So I learned that officials are very cautious about to promote anything that are not be approved by any of those written documents. So I think you need an environment that really can motivate those officials to being creative, to support the new ideas. Then I think also I find that there is a indicator that there are some positions are more helpful for another bureaucratic position, more helpful for another than other bureaucratic agencies' positions to see more of the effective use of bridge leaders. So the successful bridge leaders in my research, I find are usually emerge in those bureaucratic agencies. They are dealing with economic planning, coordination. So that, such as the Development and Reform Commission. They're dealing with energy, economic planning. They need to work with industrial sectors, building sectors. So they talk with all the different sectors all the time. So they are able to coordinate cross divisional coordination inside the government and outside the government. But some bureaucratic agency, the building sectors, they are more responsible for enforcement, the building code, as well as some of the environmental protection agency. They are more enforceable, top-down approach enforcement. They tend to, as I research shows, that they are tend to not that fruitful size to see the bridge leaders, because they put some limitations incorporating with different, particularly industrial sector. As I just mentioned, that low carbon development in China is very core to the addressing climate change. Development issue is economic growth. So you need people who knows or being part of the economic development part in their everyday work to be the most, I think, potential successful bridge leaders. So I think then I think the final is very brief. How can we see another the bridge leader concepts or can be applied to another political system? Actually, there are books write about the different subnational climate politics in the U.S. I think Barry Rape's work actually emphasized the important role of state level, officials in similar bridge role in mobilized resources. So I see the potential, but I haven't seen really a specific work in helping us to understand more. I think we need more research on that. But I think the policy entrepreneur idea coming out of the best democratic system. But I think maybe the bridge leaders are not like China, more of a within the government. They can be maybe different players outside the government. They can be also effective in mobilized resources. Yeah.
Great. So I have Eden and then Timmons and then Minjun. Okay, great.
Thank you so much for this excellent presentation, interesting topic. I have a question about the explanatory variable. I think here it's the bridge leaders, it's those entrepreneurial politicians. I'm thinking about what makes them entrepreneurial? What benefits do they get from designing and implementing those policies? Is it promotion incentives, or they can get some side payments or economic benefits from experimenting with those policies? And I have several clarification questions. That's what's the political support that entrepreneurial politicians trying to get? Is it from the central government, central leaders, or is it provincial leaders? And also, who are those trained personnel? Are they civil servants? that's specifically recruited for this purpose, or are they like existing staff that who are designated with those new functions? And what are those alliance comprised of? Are they mostly those mayors or like deputy directives and civil servants, or does it also include business interests? So I'm kind of suggesting that if it's a political incentive of promotion, or if it's because the trained personnel, if you have lots of trained personnel, you need lots of physical capacity to achieve that. And Shenzhen is arguably the richest city with lots of like intensive economic activities going on. So it has more physical capacity and administrative capacity. So I'm kind of thinking, is that the reason why Shenzhen succeed while others don't?
Eden, I think we've got 4 questions or 4 or 5 in there. So maybe pick 1 or 2 to answer, and then we'll try to get others in as well. Great.
Yeah. They're all great thoughts on that. So I think I want to keep it brief because of time. So you're right. So what are the incentives? What motivates those officials to become entrepreneurial? I think there are 2 types of incentives. One is actually there's no, as I just mentioned, immediate political promotion for them, but they can get with a I think the benefits from helping their boss to get promoted also make them in a better position to advance their career locally, even though it's not explicitly written on the paper. Then there are also definitely economic gains because those officials, they actually are in this process of proving large development projects that sometimes make them into tricky positions. So there are some of the bureaucratic entrepreneurs actually committed into crime after a few years without bounded responsibilities. So that means there can be economic, I think, gains if because they need to approve those projects, work with industrial sectors. But then the things like that is not immediate gains. Like for all the cases, only one of the cases the entrepreneurs actually made leading into problems without because of the economic element in that. Then I think the another part of the questions with the clarifications we can also maybe discuss after the talk.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I think for me, I liked how you discussed Shenzhen's case, but at the same time, I was wondering whether Shenzhen's case was not very unique from the other 3 cases that was discussed, because Shenzhen is like the 5th largest city in China. Mm-hmm. And I think as a result, I was wondering if there are preceding variables before institutionalization that actually led to Shenzhen becoming more environmental friendly. For example, the progress was probably much more easier to make considering the infrastructure in Shenzhen was non-existent until like 1980s. So I feel like it would have been much easier to build the environmental friendly infrastructure compared to Xiamen, which is more of a historical city. And also as the 5th largest city, I'm assuming that there'll be large central party attention, whereas where the bureaucrats are more incentivized for promotions, whereas other cities, I'm not entirely sure, but I guess I can hear your explanations about that. And I was also wondering about the existence of neighboring cities that these cities can pollute, this export pollution to. So, for example, Dongguan is one of the largest manufacturing city that is located right next to Shenzhen. So I was wondering if the existence of Dongguan helps Shenzhen become a city that could actually become environmental friendly and help them build a structure like that. Thank you.
Terrific questions. And maybe, again, sort of pick one to focus on just in the interest of time.
Yeah, I'm so glad to see you have so much domestic local knowledge about different cities. I want to be brief, but we can have more discussion. So how unique is Shenzhen, whether it's actually showing the comparison side. So the things like this research really helps us to understand. So we need to admit that there are no cities that are identical, right? But if we think about, particularly that it also shows the scope of this theoretical framework. I try to explain those new initiatives like low carbon. It was very abstract ideas to all the cities in China. No matter it's Shenzhen or very lagging areas, city areas, they have no idea of what is low carbon about. They have no carbon accounting. So for all of them, they start at the same point, have no prior experience in dealing with this new topic. So the question is how they build the capacity. Yeah, how over the years, why some keep doing that, some dropped out, right? So I think from that perspective, so it's a comparative. So why they joined the program with similar time, but with different outcome. So we can decide more for those details who are the more minor influencers to make the choices. But actually, I think some of the variables we know, like in the literature, central local relationship, leadership, that doesn't really explain the outcome. Yeah. So that is from my research, I show that the importance of middle level bureaucrats in sustaining the action.
Great. We've got at least one more question left. So, Timmons?
That was great. I'm really fascinated, and I can't stop thinking about our local politics here. I'll save that for another time. Implementation Alliance. What about the anti-implementation alliance? Where do they fit? I mean, if that's a wheel, I'm like thinking, are they a rock in the road, or are they, actually like a spanner getting stuck in the wheel? But mostly I wanted you to talk about your 2x2 table, because 3 of the categories are basically do nothing, right? One is symbolic, one is performative, and one is sporadic. So you said there were 81 municipalities, if I was listening. Right, and only 2 or 3 actually would fit in your upper left corner there. Is that right?
They have like institutional, yeah.
That have institutionalized low carbon pathways. So it seems like there's a lot of work to be done theorizing the rest. Right, and I guess I'm not clear what the difference between performative and symbolic are.
Yeah.
You went flying over that because that's not your story today.
Okay, so you want to talk a little bit about the different types? Yeah. So I think that is a fascinating question. In a way, like we're always very confused when we look at so many like carbon pledges from cities, right? How can we understand whether some of them just is a show, some actually very serious, right? And a lot of like trying to first guess is whether they're environmental friendly, whether they have a more of an economic advanced advantages. So I think this typology helps us to understand like from the starting point. So every city is the same. They have no experience, no very with low carbon, have no have upper level incentives how they behavior, why they are the change. So for the time. So I want to emphasize the difference between these two aspects. So performative engagement is really the cities like in Nanchang, they want to get money because we know that cities, they're usually lack of money, resources, and also authority in decision making, but they introduce institutions, right? So it's already beyond our expectation. We thought they were not able. They are not very lagging behind, like the 3 cases, they introduced institutions, but sometimes they just cannot sustain it because for this symbolic engagement is they are lacking of local coalition, as you mentioned, the opposition from the power sector. And the power sector is sometimes not like within their administration. Power sector can be like state-owned enterprises or provincial enterprises. In this like Zhenjiang case, I briefly mentioned, is from the provincial state enterprises. They in charge of power generation. They want to work with the city to really move along their pledges. So we see some of those I think strong players not cooperate, not build part of the coalition can slow down the implementation. So they are symbolic in a way. They put a lot of effort, not just to appear the funding, but they are hard to implement because lacking of the coalition.
This is great. We have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask for a short question and a short answer.
Yeah.
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah. So I would also love to know more about your theory's implications to Chinese politics. Do you think the way like bridge leaders or middle-level technocrats becoming the public facing of this like environmental agenda is something that could also apply to other domains of Chinese politics? Or is it because environment is kind of a relatively newer domain that is not in a traditional political framework?
I think that the things that's a great question too. So the middle level bureaucrats, local officials, So I think from more of an empirical sense, we know they're important, but we just didn't have a theory to understand how important they are, why they're important. Because a lot of tension was like put attention to the higher level of officials in Beijing. They're so super important. We thought like the central command is the one of the most important thing. So I think this area is lacking a lot of like a theorizing. So that is the contribution of this book, help us understand the role and the process, the strategies, how those local officials can use to actually bring longer change from of those initial steps. So I think for like you mentioned about, so that is not really outside of the conventional political efforts. But I think for the previous literature, trying to understand the Chinese political dynamics, implementation, always the challenging comes, and also the understand stops at, okay, political turnovers happens, it won't sustain. I think my book try to contribute also to that. They can sustain if you have like those local officials, they spend their entire life there, how to keep mobilizing resources, keep trying to pushing like the building of institutions, particularly with training of personnel to sustain those new forms or introduce new forms of change in the existing system. Yeah.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Dr. Gong. Please join me in thanking her.
Thank you.